Lyon-Helm, Senator Canavan.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President. Well, at the very least in this debate, it's good to see that some senators on the Labor side are just as agile and nimble as this government. They are showing a level of agility, and is it nimbility? I don't know if that's a word, but nimbleness, that's perhaps a word, Madam Acting Deputy President. Nimbleness and agility that we've been asking them to do. We've been asking them just to be a little bit more open-minded and to see the possibilities for this nation. Unfortunately, they haven't really applied that agility and that nimbleness to the issues facing the country and the problems and concerns that people have in the real world. They've applied that agility and nimbleness to their arguments that they're bringing to this debate. Because I was here only a couple of weeks ago, Madam Acting Deputy President, when Senator Dastyari was scurrying around getting the numbers on this particular amendment that the Labor Party had to do with tax transparency, and they were making the argument that it's okay to put this provision in the bill to make everybody with a net worth more than $100 million be transparent. It's okay to do that because it's already available. It's already available through ASIC. You can just pay, I think it was $38, and you can get the details. Well, since then, it's become apparent that actually some companies can request not to have that information made public, obviously because they prefer to have their matters, personal tax matters, private. And now we have a completely different argument that now we need it because these people are excluded, and there is a list of businesses that are exempt from those ASIC provisions. Now, it's, I think, very interesting and very important to recognise that this exemption to ASIC reporting, my understanding is that this exemption was introduced in 1995, Madam Acting Deputy President. 1995. Who was in charge in 1995, Madam Acting Deputy President? It was the Labor Party. The Labor Party introduced this particular exemption, and now they're trying to argue against it. They didn't even realise there was an exemption a couple of weeks ago, and now they're using it as part of their argument to justify something that they really didn't understand. And it's clear now they didn't understand because they didn't understand how the law works. Now, they're being very agile on this debate to change tack on this argument, to justify why they need to now continue their position even though information has changed. Unfortunately, they're not so agile sometimes when it comes to transparency from other organisations. They're very keen here to have individual Australians having to put on the public record their individual tax affairs, even if there's no even suggestion that they're doing the wrong thing. They might be paying their tax, they might be lodging it on time, doing everything right. They would have to put their personal financial affairs out to public domain. That's what the Labor Party want to do. That's what the Labor Party want to do. But even though they believe in transparency in that regard, they completely oppose efforts to improve transparency when it comes to trade unions or registered organisations. Registered organisations have a very privileged place in our legislative framework. They are protected and exempted from trade practices laws. They have the ability to collect a bargain among their members, much more powers than farmers get in that regard because they are registered organisations under an Act. But they currently can hide a lot of the information, including director fees, whether or not they've actually lodged their appropriate statements with the Fair Work Australia, the relevant regulatory body. So a few years ago, we, and actually it was Mr Tony Abbott and the other place, put forward a private members bill to increase transparency on registered organisations, to make it a civil offence for a reporting unit not to lodge a compliant, full or concise report with Fair Work Australia. That's right, it wasn't even an offence, civil or otherwise, it wasn't even an offence under the Fair Work Act for a trade union not to lodge their proper reports with the appropriate regulatory body. And we know from certain scandals in trade unions over the past few years that many organisations had failed to lodge those reports. Guess what the Labor Party's approach was to that bill? Nothing. Nothing. They didn't want any transparency to organisations that get privileged places in our legislative framework that should be subject to transparency because the members pay fees. Ordinary workers, ordinary Australians pay fees every week to be members of those organisations. They deserve that transparency. They deserve that organisation to be full and compliant, but they don't want to apply that in those instances. They do want to apply it, Madam Acting Deputy President, to people that happen to have some wealth. in our society. And I support the statements of Senator Lionhelm. I don't think we should be dividing the country in any way. I don't think we should be dividing the country on race, on creed, on background, or on income. We should apply laws to everybody equally. And if there are people that are doing the wrong thing who have less than $100 million, or people that are doing the wrong thing having more than $100 million, the law should apply to them equally, because I believe that every Australian deserves to be equal before the law. And if they have done the wrong thing, the law should absolutely come down on them like a ton of bricks, but we shouldn't seek to make one set of rules for some Australians and another set of rules for other Australians, because there has been no evidence presented here that somehow there is non-compliance or a culture of non-tax paying in those people earning above a certain amount of income. No evidence. We've had a huge Senate inquiry into this issue. It's had hearings all around the country, and while certainly that inquiry exposed issues, particularly in regards to multinational tax avoidance, there was absolutely no evidence that individual taxpayers in this country are somehow avoiding large amounts of tax, or that there is any deficiencies in the powers and privileges that the Australian Taxation Office has to follow up any issues on individual taxpayers. Now, without any of that evidence, why would we impose this unequal burden? Why would we do this? Why would we do this? One reason I think that this is being raised again is an attempt from the Labor Party to reheat, and have a sequel on an agenda here with trying to bring in the Prime Minister. It failed a few weeks ago. They're now trying for the sequel. I'd advise the Labor Party, usually the sequels are worse than the original movie. Usually they're not as good. And this one is certainly a poor man's sequel relative to their attempt a few weeks ago. And finally, Madam Acting Deputy President, I do say I'm a relatively new senator, and it does frustrate me no end when we in this place seek to place a higher bar or a higher burden or greater compliance on individuals in our country, a higher burden than we would on ourselves. If we in this chamber and the other place think that it's appropriate for Australians over a certain amount of income or assets to make their taxpayer, their personal financial affairs and their tax returns public, why wouldn't we impose that same obligation ourselves? And I haven't seen anyone in this chamber propose that. I haven't heard anyone. And I think it's deeply hypocritical for people here to try and impose a standard on other Australians that haven't necessarily done anything wrong, but impose that standard on them, when I don't think a lot of people would be too comfortable in this place doing that. And I'm not proposing it, but if others want to propose a law for certain Australians, they should be willing to apply it to themselves as well.